Okay, good afternoon. I think I've met you all before by now, so I am joined now by Ni Aikwe Parks, correct pronunciation, who is a Ghanaian writer, editor, socio-cultural commentator, and performance poet, amongst other things. He is a 2007 recipient of Ghana's National Accrag Award for Poetry and Literary Advocacy. He has held visiting positions at the University of Southampton and California State University, so he's very comfortable in these kind of surroundings, and delivered lectures and talks on poetry and creative writing at universities internationally. Ni holds an MA in creative writing from Birkbeck, the University of London, and serves on the boards of the Kane Prize and of World Literature Today. As an editor, he formed the London arts organisation Tell Tales with Courtier Newland in 2001, combining music and storytelling to provide audiences with interactive short story readings, which doesn't surprise me because that is a common theme through Ni's work. He likes to mix things up and combine them and create hybrids. He's even also currently working on a couple of writing projects for the stage. And my favourite part of this bio is he has designed a shoe. So there's nothing this man can't do. But most pertinently, he is also the author of the acclaimed hybrid literary novel, Tale of the Bluebird. His debut, it was shortlisted for the 2010 Commonwealth Prize and has been translated into Dutch, German, French, and Japanese. So in this session, we're going to hear Ni read a short excerpt from Tale of the Bluebird, and then he and I will have a short chat, and we will open up to the audience for your questions as well. So actually, I will just hand over to you to read, exactly. I think the story will speak for itself, and then we can talk a bit more about the setting and the context.
Hi. So I'm reading from near the beginning of the book. There's not much to know except there's some remains and in a village, and the police arrive at this point. We were at our somewhere when they came. First, it was a young woman whose eyes could not rest. Since you are here, let me tell you. The ancestors say that the truth is short, but Sebi, when the tale is bad, then even the truth stretches like a toad run over by a car on those new roads they are building. I, the one who crouches, the one who watches, I, Yaopoku, who has roamed the forest from Atewa to Kade, seen every duka, hog, cobra, and leopard that turns this our earth, I was surprised. But let me tell you the tale before it goes cold. It was my grandfather, Opoku, the one whose hands were never empty, who told me that the tale the Englishman calls history is mostly lies written in fine dye. This is no such tale. It is said that the wise weaver of webs, Anansi, did not sell speech. So I shall speak. I shall tell the tale. It was Kwesida, Inchi Kwesi, just 1 week before Kru Kwesi, when it would be a taboo Sebi to speak of death and funerals. Now what trip before we were to pour libation for the ones on the other side. I'm sure of the day, but if you think I'm lying, you can check with the Bono, who have kept the days for the Santihene for centuries. We were at our somewhere when she came, the one whose eyes would not lie still. I myself was coming from the palm wine tapper's hut. The woman who sells palm wine doesn't open on Kwesida. She went to live in the big city, Accra, for 6 years, and when she came back, she refused to work on Sundays. Before she went to the city, she used to sell tomatoes on the roadside, but that is another story. The palm wine tapper gave me a large calabash of his special, and I was going back to my hut when I heard the woman scream like a grass cutter in a trap. I don't play with my palm wine. No. So I went to put it in the corner of my hut. Then I came to the Trinidad tree in the village center. She was wearing these short skirts on, showing her thighs, Sebi, but her legs were like a baby ostrich 2 front legs. Thin. It was later that I found she was some minister's girlfriend. This world is full of wonders. Her driver was wearing khaki up and down like a colo man, and he wanted to hold her still. But the woman was shaking her head and screaming. And there, she strengthened herself and ran towards a pale car at the roadside. The driver followed her rear like dust. When I asked the children, Oforiwa, Kusi, and the twins, Penyi and Kakra, who were playing at the village center, what happened, they said the cream Benz parked and the woman was following a blue-headed bird. It's true that our village has many beautiful things, when she held her nose. Then she called her driver, and they sniffed the air like dogs until they got to Kofiata's hut. They said, "Ago," but nobody answered. Then the driver raised the kete and held it up, and the woman went inside. That's when she screamed. It was still morning, and the sound made the forest go quiet. But it's what happened after that's wondrous. It's true. Even the eagle has not seen everything. I'm jumping slightly to when the policeman's asking the hunter about what happened. The policeman walked towards me while the children jumped around him. Oforiwa started singing a Papa Police song. That girl is always singing and clapping. Kusi was standing by the 8 policemen in uniform, touching their guns while they tried to push him away. These policemen, they carry guns all the time, everywhere. Even I, a hunter, I put my long gun down on Kwesida. His name is Openyipoku, said the twins. Ah, said the policeman, senior man. He showed his mother's training and swallowed his groundnuts and put his hands behind him. Openyipoku, please, do you speak English? I smiled and finished my palm wine. Small. I'll go for Nkrumah adult education. Okay, listen, I don't get plenty time. I day house for a crowd where I get calls say some woman find something for here where they smell. You know something for the matter? Hey, the elders say that news is restless as a bird. But as for this, the woman had come in the morning, and it was still morning. Afternoon had not yet come. But these policemen were here all the way from Accra, as if there were no policemen in Tafo. I shook my head. You see the woman? Oh yes, police, I see him. Thin woman, like so. The policeman smiled. But you know they smell anything? No, I know they smell anything. He turned to look at the other policemen. Do you people smell anything? Yes, Sergeant. It stinks like rotten meat. Thank you. He turned to me again. And you know they smell anything? No, Sergeant. He shook his head. So where'd the woman go? Accra. No, which side she go for here? He raised his arm towards the Trinidad tree. I pointed at Kofiata's hut. He brought his hand down to hold the black stick in his abomu. Let's go. The other policeman followed him. After a distance, he stopped and turned to me. Openyipoku, I beg, make you come some. I called Kusi to come and get my calabash and radio, put them at the door of my house, and tell Mama Aku that I'll be back later. Then I stood up and walked to join the policemen. The Saji was trying to send the other children back, but they were singing and stopped and refused to leave. He looked at me. Children, I said, stop your silliness and go home. They stopped following the policemen and turned to leave. Suddenly, the Saji clapped. Children, do you smell anything? No, sir, Sergeant. They smiled and ran off. The Saji smiled, frowned, and looked at me. Openyipoku, why say we all they smell something where you people for here know they smell anything? I laughed. Saji, make I talk something for tree inside. Oh, Openyi, no problem. Then Saji, listen. Sebi, our village is like a vagina. Those on the inside have no problems with it. Those on the outside think it stinks. We were at our somewhere when they came. First the woman and her driver, then 119 policemen, then a drunk pathologist. And now they had left us with one tall red policeman, a gunman, I think, and a police car that the children climbed in the evening. And they said the next day a graduate was coming. I had to tell the chief in the morning. We waited to see. Man has his plans, and the ancestors also have their plans, and sometimes they are not the same. The needs of the earth are greater than the needs of us. We are not complaining. My father and his father before him were hunters. That is what was chosen. My own 2 sons have not followed me. They have gone to their mother's family in the south. So I am the last hunter in this village. I have seen all the wonders of the forests and rivers, and I have told many of the young men, but they all want to go to the cities and make money. Even the story of how I followed the Densu River rode it in a dugout canoe, learning the bird songs as the current carried me down, watched the many patterned butterflies flutter on the riverbanks, ran my hand in the water like a fish swimming all the way down to the mangroves of the south, where I saw my wife bathing naked in the waters, her buttocks wide and dark, her legs strong and bold, her beauty greater than the royal pythons. Even that story does not entice them. They say there are beautiful women everywhere now. And I tell them that it's not just about beauty, because beauty does not pay debts. But do they listen? The medicine man, Odro, cannot find an assistant, and the young ones don't trust him anymore. They want tablets, and he gives them leaves. Things are not the same, but night had fallen just the same. I had been out too long, and it was time to go to my wife. That red policeman was smoking something. I could smell it. If he wanted to stay awake, he should have chewed cola. Smoke does not keep the eyes open. Oh, Kofiata, because of you, all these people have come to do what they like in our village. My eyes had seen what the mouth must not speak. But one must not let the sight of death, Sebi, stop one from sleeping. And so I went home. Those who have lived know that darkness is only temporary. Morning brings its own light. Stop there.
Great. I would like you to keep going. Fantastic. Thank you very much, Nee. So I really enjoy this quote from your excerpt. I shall speak. I shall tell the tale. And I wonder how you feel about it. Whose tale are you telling, and who are you telling it to?
1, 2.
Oh, you need to press that little guy.
1. No, I think I did. Hello. They just don't have me on yet. Or the battery is low. It's got a red light.
Let me give you this one.
Well, primarily, I'm telling the story of the characters in the book. There's no great project in trying to control the minds of people out in the world. I'm very faithful to my characters. So I create the situation, that's what I do. And then I try and follow, as much as possible, the characters that I've created, rather than necessarily imagine an audience that I'm telling the story to. Because I think that if I do that, then I'm not being faithful to my characters, and it makes the story contrived. Whereas if I follow what they would do, then it's more likely to have a universality, because individual truth is the thing that is universal about the world. I mean, we're all different. I mean, we might be classed as whatever, German, Ghanaian, whatever it is. But if I pick any two Germans, even myself and my older brother are different. Yeah. You know, as much as we ate the same food, even though he ate more than I did, that kind of thing, we are completely different. I mean, I love him and we get along, but, you know, I know exactly how to push his buttons and get him angry, which means that he's different from me. Yeah. So what I strive to do is tell that story. I mean, if I ever imagine an audience, I try to write a story that would interest the boy that I was, because when I was a kid, I had no capacity for nonsense. So if I can't entertain that kid, then I can't entertain anyone.
Interesting. As a child, what did you hear? I mean, what was in your ears, the stories?
Well, I mean, I grew up in a country. I was born in England. My parents were studying there. I was the extracurricular activity. So I grew up in this gray linguistic space of English. Of course, we spoke Ghana at home, but outside of that. And then I went to Ghana. I must have been about 4 years old, and suddenly, for one thing, I came to appreciate that there was way more light in the world than I thought there was, because all the light in England is hiding somewhere. But then the other thing is...
Behind the clouds.
The other thing is, I mean, Ghana has so many languages.
Yes.
So then there was this music of so many languages, and constantly living in a space where there's something you don't understand. But I think that's something that's really beautiful. And so even in my work, I don't try to write something that is understandable to everybody. It's just that it's enough for you to go with. And that's pretty much what life has been like for me since I went to Ghana as a kid. Because as much as I speak 3 languages, local languages, I don't speak all the 60 plus that exists. So there's always some mystery, but I love mystery.
Yeah.
And I read lots of mystery growing up as well. So, there's all of that.
Yeah, so that's all in here. I mean, that really is literally in here because you are peppering the text with language and linguistics that, I mean, I certainly didn't understand, but it didn't matter to me at all. You're so caught up in what's happening that, and it is very oral. I mean, I could hear voices, I could hear language. I heard it wrong because it's great to hear you read it out loud and go, oh, that's how it's pronounced. But yeah, I mean, it's very visceral, to read that. And it kind of, I don't know, it's like hearing poetry or words that you just don't understand, but you understand the meaning perhaps even more. Was that ever a problem when you were writing, that you were including language that maybe not all readers would understand? Not to you, but to anyone else, when you're getting the novel published?
I mean, I had my debates and problems with editors and publishers publishers who thought they knew what I should be doing with the story, but it's not their story.
Yeah.
The story belongs to the characters, and Opeyipoku can't speak in a way other than the way he speaks, because actually his language in the book is Tree. It's transliterated into English, but without that structure, all of his wisdom falls away. I mean, this is one of the things that happens when you force a language on people. You actually find that people who are very wise become infantilized. I see that sometimes in hospitals in Ghana, where, I mean, some of the doctors who've trained elsewhere, they can speak the local languages but refuse to. And so you see an old person come in and they have an ailment, and it doesn't matter how great a doctor you are, you still need your patient to tell you what's going on. And if you put them in a position where they can't tell you because you want to pretend you don't speak the language, they become like infants again. So they're coming in with their nephews or their grandchildren and saying to them in the local language, and they're having to translate it. I mean, but then you look at that person and you think that person's dignity is being stripped away from them because their language is taken away. And you see that with immigration. People come into the country and people look at them like they're dumb. But actually, I mean, this person has a whole set of linguistic skills and is learning your language. Yes, they may speak it broken, but it's in addition to what they already have. It doesn't mean that they're stupid. It just means that they're learning something new. And so I'm very interested in that notion, and I definitely want my characters to have dignity regardless of what they do, so they must speak their own language.
Yeah, so it's a gift to them. So in the text, you, again, and I wanted to talk to you about this having read about you anyway, it struck me that, and actually I think the book is referred to as a kind of literary hybrid. And you're juxtaposing a lot of different things, whether it's the narrative voice, first person, third person, the language, English, Ghanaian, however it works. You obviously like to just juxtapose things, but then let them be. Is that something that you just do accidentally? Have you found out more about yourself from the fact that you do that?
I mean, as I said, I focus primarily on the characters, but I think also, when you imagine yourself as a writer, so, imagine yourself writing something, I think probably when I imagine myself writing something, I must have imagined myself writing something much more English. But in writing and allowing the characters to speak, I realized that that's not me. I can't do that because I am a hybrid. As much as, English is a very easy language for me to kind of operate in, it's not my first language. Mm-hmm. It's not the language in which I feel pain. I was not smacked in English. I was smacked in Ga. There's a whole set of emotional connections to Ga that don't exist in English. So I'm very logical and distant in English. And also, I mean, the fact of the matter is, every country that has had a colonial encounter and whose borders have been drawn such that what used to be separate nations are now within one nation, are in a hybrid space. That's who we are. There is no point in trying to pretend that there's a harmonious single identity of Ghanaian or Indian or Nigerian. It does not exist. So if we're hybrids, let's embrace our hybridity. And in fact, all humans are hybrids. When you think about it, you've got your mother and your father. Already, you're born fucked up, so just accept it and embrace it and let the world be that way. The way people wash dishes is different. When two people come to live together, there can be arguments about how dishes are washed. And you're the kid of these people, and you have to grow up with those arguments. One person will teach you this way, and then you kind of realize that when your mom's around, you wash it this way, and when your dad's around, you wash it that way. that's hybridity. It's having these codes. I tell the same story to my nieces or my nephews, or I tell the same story to my great aunt. I'm going to use different language. It's the same story. So it's understanding that we all have this hybridity within us. So why is it that if we're writing, we have to inhabit this space and suddenly start speaking differently? Because, somebody before us spoke in that way. There's no novelty in that.
Yeah. You said that it surprised you, perhaps, that you didn't write so heavily in English or in an English way. Were there other things that surprised you about the process of writing a novel? Or about yourself?
Not particularly. I mean, it surprised me that it was so hard, I probably expected a smoother ride. But the actual, I really love telling stories, and I've always loved telling stories. So it wasn't a huge... I mean, when I was in secondary school, I used to write love letters for people, for money. So I was already...
Entrepreneur.
I was already kind of adept at adopting other people's voices. Yeah. and finding out what they wanted to say and putting it in the right way. So, but writing was always a hobby for me. It was only when I was working, as a professional in a multinational, I had lots of money, all the things you think you want when you're studying. When I had that, I realized I wasn't fulfilled, and I kept writing to deal with that. And so I just decided to give it a go. So I think writing fiction surprised me, because poetry is my first love, and it's the thing that I wrote. But once I accepted that there was stories that needed to be told in the long form, there wasn't much surprise. It was more of learning the process of patience, which you don't necessarily have as a poet, because you can finish a poem in a day and you can't finish a novel in a day. I mean, you could, but you need to be some kind of masochist.
Yeah, Kerouac, just banging away on a typewriter, one long piece of paper, don't stop. So, I mean, obviously, you've just mentioned you've written poetry, you've done a lot of spoken word, you've written songs. What motivates you? Where does that come from? Do you feel like there is, like we mentioned at the beginning, there's something that you need to say, need to tell, or does it just something that's you can't stop from happening?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose, we all have different levels of sensitivity, and my level of sensitivity is just breathing. If I'm breathing, I'm inspired to do stuff. I hear a sound somewhere, and it sounds like a song to me, and so I'll, or I write a phrase, or, yeah. And I like teasing people. I like getting people into trouble. So I'm playful in that way, and so that comes out in sometimes, if I'm on my own, then there's a kind of diarrhea of creative output because I don't have anybody else to throw it at. Yeah.
Sorry,
It's okay.
So, and I mean, I noticed, obviously, when I was reading Tale of the Blue Bird, that there is poetry. I mean, there is repetition in the language. There are poetic phrases, and poetry is often something that you do out loud. You're a spoken word poet. Does your book come to life in a different way when you read it out loud?
Well, when I write anything, regardless of even when I'm doing non-fiction stuff. I did a radio documentary for the BBC on Auden. I read it out because I think language is, look, writing is convenient in some ways, but in some ways it fossilizes what is originally something oral. Something that we share. It's about sound. It's about, you can't build an altar at the foot of some words on paper. So it has to be heard. And so for me, when I write, I read it out just to make sure it sounds right. And that's how I edit. Yeah. So if I read it and it sounds false, then it means I'm being pretentious. There's something that is not right inherently in the text. And so, yeah, that's always been a huge part of my writing. And also because I suppose part of storytelling or becoming the kind of person who shares stories is eavesdropping, and I did a lot of eavesdropping as a kid, and so you hear. So, for instance, conversation is never as linear as a lot of writers, render it in their text. So dialogue is amazing for the amount of repetition that happens. You can see two people discussing something, and somebody's made a point, and you're standing there, and 10 minutes later, the person they're making the point to hasn't got the point, and yet they've been having a conversation for 10 minutes. And so these repetitions happen, and as an observer, you can see, which is why eavesdropping is great, because if you're in the conversation, you don't get that, But eavesdropping also means that you do get some people's secrets and stuff. But I'm very good with keeping other people's secrets.
I've got such a clear picture of you as a child now, like sneaking around, writing love letters for other people, eavesdropping.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's good fun.
It's been good fuel for your career. Let's talk about the book once it's out in the world. What was the reception to it in Ghana and elsewhere?
I was published by a really big publisher in the UK, and what tends to happen if you're a kind of starting author with a big publisher is that they will put the book out there, they'll give you a couple of days of attention, and they'll forget about you. So I've been very lucky in the sense that my book is still in print, 8 years later, something like that, which doesn't happen very often, and I think they've been surprised by that. So I'd say I had good reception, and that's partly because of my initial career as a spoken word artist. So I had a kind of visibility before the novel came out, and so people who'd come to see me doing spoken word bought the book and stuff like that. And in Ghana, it's been great because one of the things that I do with the names in this, a lot of the names are plays on words. So like Mensisi, which is the name of one of the characters in here, in Tree means do not trample, do not cheat. So it's a warning. Her name is a warning, and then you have somebody who doesn't treat her well, and so when something happens to them, for somebody who speaks Tree, that is not a surprise because it's in the name. The village is called Sonokrom, or Sono in Tree is elephant. So it's the town of the elephants, which is to say that they were in peace and then they were trampled. So there's a lot of wordplay, which again, for me, writing, I have to entertain myself as well.
Yeah.
And so you don't need to know that to enjoy the book.
Yeah.
But if you know that, then you have this extra level of entertainment. So one of the most common comments I get in Ghana is, and especially the kids I used to read with as a kid, and we read anything that came off the streets, books with no covers mainly, and pulp fiction, which is why I actually borrowed from crime to write this, because I'd read, all those guys you can think of, Mickey Spillane, it's stuff with sex thrown in every 10 pages and stuff like that. I read it until the sex was mundane. By the age of 30, I'm like, yeah, all right, you wrote about sex, it's fine. Let's keep going. And those guys, read the book and said, this is the first time I've realized that the other books that I've read by, so some other books I've read by African writers are not written with us in mind, they're written with a European audience in mind. But I didn't set out to write for a Ghanaian audience. I just set out to write to be true to the characters. Yeah. And I guess they recognize them. So it's been a huge compliment. And the book's done really well in Ghana. And yeah. Yeah.
I suppose there's a kind of coded acknowledgement in that of...
Yeah. There are things that we do where you don't think about it because you've had this pressure constantly to conform to a Western standard. So for instance, the names of trees, right? These trees don't exist in the West, and therefore they exist as scientific names. Now, what you would have seen in the past is somebody would go and write the scientific name for the tree in the book. But it's just as meaningless to the everyday person in the West or in Ghana as the traditional name. Now, we named it because we love that tree and it serves us and it plays a part in our life. So why not use that name that has meaning for people than use some Sapodilus esteferium?
That's my favorite tree.
That's like, it's just, it doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah.
So it was really about being aware of all these codes. And the reason I'm aware of those things, and I thank my parents for, is that they moved back to Ghana. So I was born in England, and I moved back to Ghana. So first of all, there was this huge thing as a kid, which I wasn't aware of suddenly being aware of my surroundings, which doesn't happen if you're in the same place all the time. Yeah. You don't have that huge... And then having the kind of cultural confidence, which you get by growing up in a place like Ghana, because our news is read by people from Ghana, our planes are flown by people from Ghana, everything. Yeah. So you never question whether or not you can do anything. So when you come to the West and you see the racism and people being excluded, but you can actually take a back seat and say, okay, this is really messed up, and I'm going to see how they're making it work. So then you can analyze it, and that can then come back into how you create your cultural output. So I was aware of, when I was having these discussions with editors, people saying to me, but why are you using this, and why is this italicized? But because I had that distance, I was able to say, well, I'm italicizing because when I read Mickey Spillane, when there were Italian words or Spanish words, they were italicized. So even though the hunter seems to be speaking in English, it's in tree. So everything that comes from the encounter with the colonial is italicized. I don't care how uncomfortable it makes you feel, that's what I'm trying to do. So having the language to make that argument means that the book could come into existence in the way that it is, rather than in this modulated way. I mean, I'll tell you, one of the huge publishers in the UK wanted the book, but they told me, you need the more Western character to play a bigger part so that people can relate to it. So they said, you need to make this book 3/4 bigger than it is so that you write more of him. Because, and this is the final thing they told me, books from Africa and Asia are meant to be epic. So basically, they wanted me to make this a fat book just because this is how they perceive books from Africa and Asia. So these are the kinds of forces that you don't want to be dealing with, but they're out there. And you need to kind of have the context to be able to argue your point. And I was really lucky to have an agent that stood by me. And even though it took almost a year to sell the book, he stood by me and he supported me in my views, and it came into the world the way it did.
Fantastic. Good for him, her.
Him.
Yeah. Didn't want to make an assumption. No gender assumptions with me. So let's talk about the fact that it is effectively a crime fiction. You said, that was kind of the parameters that you set yourself, or the genre that you set yourself. Why? What is useful about the parameters of the crime genre that kind of enabled you with this story?
Well, it's recognizable. Using crime is the equivalent of using online dating. Like, you go onto the train platform, right? You don't know who wants to date there, so you don't know how to approach them, right? But you go onto online dating, everybody on there wants to date. Yeah. So you have no problem going up and saying, hey, do you want to date, right? Yeah. And it's the same thing with crime. People recognize what crime is, so then there's so much work done for you. Yeah. In terms of people know that there's going to be something to uncover, and so they're there for the mystery, and you can tell a great story within that. Yeah. And so I think it's a great genre, and it's a genre that actually allows for a huge amount of flexibility, simply because of the assumptions people make. And so you don't have to do this work; it does the work for you. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And also, I suppose with your book, in a way, you're truly embracing mystery. Yeah. And, I guess one of the kind of juxtapositions in it is the sort of modern scientific world versus the sort of spiritual, traditional world, and somebody's experience of both, and having to kind of make a choice about where they want to be seen, or where they fit, or the narrative that suits them. Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately, Opinion Poku says at some point that you have to choose the story that you want to believe. He does. It's about making a choice that makes you comfortable. I'm not saying one of them is right or one of them is wrong. I'm just saying they ask completely different questions. Yeah. And that is the kind of option or the reality that anthropology and history has chosen to avoid a lot of the time. Yeah. They would go into countries and write about the people without asking them, what are the questions you ask about the world? They would assume that everybody asks the same questions about the world, and so they must have answered it wrong because we know it to be this. Yeah. Which is such a messed up way to approach life. I mean, how are you ever going to experience anything new if you assume that your way is always the way, I know certainly in sex life that is not very good for you. So ask questions. You've got to ask questions. If you want to attain the nirvana of anything, you've got to ask questions. Yeah. And so the whole point was that it's different questions. There's this great anthropology story which I read, which actually influenced something in the book, where this guy had gone into some village in Mexico, and a beam above a door had fallen on this woman. So the villagers said it was witchcraft. And the guy said, well, I mean, it's obvious some termites have eaten this wood, so it's not witchcraft, it's the termites. And the villagers said, yes, we can see it's termites, we're not stupid, but why at this particular moment on this particular woman? That is witchcraft. And so suddenly he didn't have anything to say, because logic only goes that far to say it's termites.
Yeah.
But logic cannot deal with that timing issue,
Yeah.
that timing issue and the choice of the person it falls on.
Yeah.
And that is really, that means that you impoverish your world by only thinking about that.
Yes.
Because there are so many other ways to look at things.
Yes.
And this is where you can choose to be miserable or happy in life. So there you go.
It's a choice. Wise words. Does anyone have... Yeah, I thought we were running short on time. So does anyone have any questions for Nee? We have an extra microphone, or we did have... Oh, wait, what did it... Oh, it's here next to me. I think it works now. Thank you. Are there any questions in the audience? Tabish.
To kill a character in a novel, a character you're attached to, how do you go about doing it as a writer?
Well, I mean, I usually do it quickly.
It's a beam eaten by termites, falls on the head.
Well, I mean, in Tale of the Bluebird, at the beginning, actually nobody dies in the book. There are just some remains. And the real mystery in the novel is that the remains have no bones. So, that's the starting point. So it's a kind of how done it rather than who done it. The book I'm writing now, I've killed somebody off, and it was really painful. And I didn't realize it was coming, but it happened. And yeah, you just got to deal with that pain and drink some whiskey. I mean, that's what I do.
Writing tips with Nee Parks. Any other questions from you guys? No?
No, I
Is there
think-
another one? Sorry.
Yeah,
Yes.
There's a conspiracist in the back.
A provocateur.
Yeah.
Hi, Nee.
Hi,
I'm
I'm Nathan.
So I just wanted to ask, especially as a West African writer, do you ever feel like inferior to like the larger West African writers like us, Nigerians?
I told you he was a provocateur.
Is that the end of your question?
I was also going to ask about Ghanaian jollof and Nigerian jollof, but I'll leave that.
But
for
I answered that question on Twitter, and you went into hiding. Once I proved to him Ghanaian jollof was better, he left Twitter for almost a year. He couldn't handle it. Anyway, so first of all, I don't know what kind of sense of inferiority has made you limit yourself to West Africa. I mean, why would you call yourself a West African writer when you have the whole continent? And this is precisely the problem, I think. So do you still want me to answer that question when I own the whole continent? Okay.
We can take that one off stage.
Yeah.
And on to Twitter. Great. Okay, well, I think that is us for time.
Yeah.
What was it? Lena, you look like... Is there somebody else? No?
I mean, if your question is about jollof, that question's been answered. Just
been-
go
yeah.
on Twitter and it's done.
Back catalogue.
Any other food we can talk about? Food is one of my obsessions.
Okay. Well, maybe we'll talk about that after.
Yeah.
Great. Well, Nee, thank you so
Thank
very
you.
much. I know that there's going to be a sound check on stage after us. That's why we're sort of surrounded and snuggled in by all these instruments. There's going to be a performance by Musa Akwanga and then a concert by Kalele. So stick around and enjoy those. But before you do so, please show your
Thanks
appreciation.
for being here for
And-
listening.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thanks, Carnival of Literatures. We've had a fantastic time. I've learned loads.